Jake Morrison walked through the massive halls of Kepler Defense Academy for the first time. The walls stretched high above his head, built for beings much larger than humans. Everything here was designed for aliens, and Jake felt very small in this place. The academy was the most important military school in the galaxy. Students came from dozens of different worlds to learn how to fight, lead, and protect their planets. Jake was the first human ever accepted here. Earth had only joined the Galactic Coalition 3 years ago, and most aliens still thought humans were weak and primitive. Jake carried his bags to the dormitory level. His room was on floor 12, which would have been impossible to reach on most alien worlds with their heavy gravity. But Jake climbed the stairs easily, his legs strong from growing up on Earth. His roommate was already there when Jake opened the door. The creature looked like a giant bug with 6 legs and 4 arms. Its shell was green and shiny, and its eyes were black and compound like a fly's eyes. "You must be the human," the creature said in perfect standard galactic. "I am Crix of the Hive Mind Collective. I have heard much about your species." Jake set down his bags and smiled. "Nice to meet you, Crix. I'm Jake Morrison from Earth." Crix tilted his head, studying Jake with curiosity. "You are smaller than I expected. The report said humans were dangerous warriors, but you look quite fragile." Jake laughed. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." Over the next few days, Jake met his classmates. There was Zithara, who looked like a walking crystal and came from a world with very low gravity. She moved slowly and carefully, afraid that the Academy's normal gravity might break her delicate body. Veltar was an amphibian with blue-green skin and 4 arms. He came from an ocean world where everything was peaceful and quiet. He jumped at loud noises and always seemed nervous. The other students were equally strange to Jake, but he tried to be friendly to everyone. Most of them seemed curious about humans, but not particularly worried. They had heard that Earth was a new member, world recently discovered by Coalition scouts. To them, humans were just another primitive species trying to catch up with galactic civilization. Classes began on Jake's 4th day at the academy. The first class was military history, taught by Professor Keklan, a tall, thin alien with gray skin and no hair. "Today we will discuss the Battle of Zirion Prime," Professor Keklan announced. "This battle shows us why proper intelligence gathering is crucial for military success." Jake listened carefully as the professor explained how the Coalition forces had underestimated their enemy and suffered a terrible defeat. The lesson was clear. Never assume your opponent is weaker than they appear. Next was tactical studies with Commander Thesic. The commander was a reptilian creature with green scales and yellow eyes. He was known throughout the academy as a tough but fair instructor. "We will run combat simulations today," Commander Thesic announced. "You will work in teams to complete various mission objectives." Jake was placed on a team with Zithara, Veltar, and 2 other students. Their mission was to capture a strategic position defended by automated turrets and drone patrols. The other students spent long minutes planning their approach. They discussed formations, timing, and backup plans. Jake listened patiently, but he could see the solution immediately. "What if we just go around?" Jake suggested when they asked for his input. "Around?" Zithara's crystal body sparkled with confusion. "But the enemy will see us." "Not if we move during their patrol cycle," Jake explained. "Watch the pattern. The EI drones follow the same route every time. There's a gap in their coverage on the eastern side." Veltar looked at the tactical display with his large eyes. "That gap only lasts for 30 seconds. It is not enough time." "It is if we run," Jake said simply. The other students stared at him. In their cultures, running was something you did only in extreme emergencies. It was exhausting and dangerous. But Jake's plan worked perfectly. While the other teams tried complex strategies involving diversions and electronic warfare, Jake's team simply sprinted through the gap in the drone patrol. They captured their objective in less than 5 minutes. Commander Thesic watched the simulation results with interest. "Cadet Morrison, your solution was unconventional." "Sorry, sir. Should I have done something else?" "No. Your tactics were effective. Tell me, how did you spot the patrol gap so quickly?" Jake shrugged. It's like watching animals hunt. They all have patterns. Once you know the pattern, you can avoid them or use it against them. The commander made a note on his datapad. Interesting. Comparison. Physical training was Jake's favorite class. The instructor, Sergeant Vorgek, was a massive creature with 6 arms and skin like stone. He designed workouts that challenged each species according to their abilities. For Zithara, this meant careful stretching exercises that wouldn't damage her crystal structure. For Veltar, it meant swimming in the Academy's aquatic training facility. For Crix, it meant complex coordination drills using all 6 of his limbs. For Jake, Sergeant Vorgek had prepared what he thought would be an exhausting human workout. A 5-mile run followed by basic strength training. Jake completed the run in 25 minutes, barely breathing hard. The strength training was equally easy. He could lift more weight than most of his classmates despite being smaller than them. Cadet Morrison, Sergeant Vorgek rumbled after class. Your physical capabilities are impressive for such a small species. Thank you, Sergeant. Tell me, what kind of physical training did you do on your home world? Jake thought about his life back on Earth. Well, I played football in high school, and I hiked a lot with my family. We lived near the mountains, so I was used to walking long distances. Sergeant Vorgek made notes. Football and hiking sounded like military training to him. Perhaps humans were more warlike than the Coalition had realized. The weeks passed quickly. Jake excelled in every class, but his instructors and classmates attributed his success to beginner's luck. They assumed that human tactics worked well against basic academy training, but would fail against real military opponents. Jake didn't mind their attitudes. He was here to learn, and he was learning a lot. The technology was amazing, and the different alien perspectives on warfare were fascinating. But he also noticed things that his classmates missed. Simple things, like how Crix always favored his left side when tired, or how Veltar unconsciously moved away from bright lights. These were just natural behaviors, but Jake filed them away in his memory. On Earth, noticing small details about other creatures could mean the difference between life and death. Jake didn't realize it yet, but his casual observations were about to change everything. 3 months into his time at Kepler Defense Academy, Jake had settled into a comfortable routine. His classmates had accepted him as just another student, though they still thought humans were relatively weak compared to other galactic species. Jake didn't mind this assumption. It made life easier when nobody expected too much from him. His favorite class was Advanced Xenobiology with Professor Velthon. The professor was unlike any creature Jake had ever seen. He looked like a giant tree that had learned to walk, with dozens of tentacle-like branches that moved independently. His bark-like skin was covered in patterns that changed color when he was excited about a topic. Professor Velthon had spent centuries studying life forms across the galaxy. His classroom was filled with specimens, holographic displays, and detailed models of creatures from hundreds of different worlds. Jake found it all fascinating, especially since many of the alien creatures reminded him of animals from Earth. On this particular day, Professor Velthon had announced a special lesson about apex predators. The entire class was excited. Most students had never seen the galaxy's most dangerous creatures, even in recordings. Today we will examine the ultimate hunters, Professor Velthon announced, his bark patterns glowing bright orange with enthusiasm. These creatures represent the pinnacle of evolutionary development. They are the reasons why entire civilizations have developed specific military doctrines and defense strategies. The lights dimmed, and a massive holographic display activated in the center of the classroom. Jake leaned forward in his seat, curious to see what the professor would show them. The first creature appeared in the display, and several students gasped. It was called a Void Stalker, and it came from Kepler Prime, the same world where the Academy was located. The Void Stalker looked like living shadow with glowing red eyes. It was roughly the size of a horse, but it moved like liquid darkness. The recording showed one hunting a large herbivore in a rocky canyon. Notice how the Void Stalker can phase through solid matter, Professor Velthon explained. This ability makes it nearly impossible to hide from them. They hunt in packs of 3 to 5 individuals, using coordinated attacks to overwhelm their prey. Jake watched the creature with professional interest. Its hunting style was efficient, and the pack coordination was impressive. It reminded him of wolves, though the phasing ability was definitely unique. His classmates were less analytical. Zithara's crystal body had gone completely transparent with fear. Veltar was making small whimpering sounds. Even Crix, usually confident and aggressive, had pulled his limbs close to his body in a defensive posture. The second creature was even more impressive. Called a Titan worm, it came from the desert world of Xerion. The massive creature erupted from underground, revealing a mouth large enough to swallow a small spacecraft. Its body stretched for hundreds of meters beneath the surface. Titan worms can remain buried for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, Professor Velthon continued. They can sense vibrations from miles away and can tunnel through solid rock at incredible speeds. The Xerion military has developed their entire ground force doctrine around avoiding these creatures. Jake nodded appreciatively. The Titan worm was an ambush predator, similar to trapdoor spiders or antlions on Earth, just much larger. The strategy was sound. Stay hidden, wait for prey to come to you, then strike with overwhelming force. Around him, his classmates were becoming increasingly distressed. Several students from high-gravity worlds were unconsciously pressing themselves lower in their seats, as if trying to get further from the underground threat. The third and final creature made even Jake raise his eyebrows. The Stormhawks came from Veltar's homeworld, and they were magnificent predators. The Stormhawk looked like a cross between an eagle and a bolt of lightning. Its wingspan was enormous, and electricity danced across its feathers. The recording showed one diving from the upper atmosphere, building up an electrical charge that it released in a devastating attack that disabled an entire research station. Stormhawks hunt from the upper atmosphere, Professor Velthon explained. They can generate electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to disable modern technology. A flock of Stormhawks once brought down a coalition cruiser that violated their territory. Veltar was visibly shaking now. Jake could understand why. Having a predator like that on your homeworld would make anyone nervous about going outside. These 3 species represent the most dangerous predators known to the coalition, Professor Velthon concluded. Each has shaped the military and cultural development of their respective worlds. The mere existence of these creatures has influenced how entire civilizations approach warfare, technology, and survival. The holographic display faded, and the classroom lights returned to normal. Professor Velthon's bark patterns had shifted to a deep blue, indicating satisfaction with his presentation. "Are there any questions about these remarkable creatures?" he asked. Jake raised his hand. "Professor, do you have any footage from Earth?" The question seemed innocent enough, but the reaction was immediate and dramatic. Professor Velthon's tentacles froze in place and his bark patterns flickered rapidly between different colors. The other students turned to stare at Jake with expressions of confusion and worry. Well, that is to say," Professor Velthon's tentacles writhed nervously. "I'm afraid Earth's predator documentation is classified at your current security. Clearance level, Cadet Morrison." Jake shrugged casually. "That's okay. I understand about classified information." He paused for a moment, thinking about the creatures the professor had shown them. They were impressive, certainly, but they didn't seem that unusual to him. Earth had plenty of dangerous animals, too. "I used to walk one to school," Jake said with a friendly smile. The silence that followed was absolute. Every creature in the room stopped moving. Professor Velthon's bark patterns went completely black, something Jake had never seen before. Zithara's crystal body began making small cracking sounds. Veltar's large eyes were wide with terror. Even Crix, who came from a warrior culture, seemed frozen in shock. Walk one to school?" Professor Velthon's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah," Jake said, not understanding why everyone seemed so upset. "Well, I walked with him. Max was a good dog, very friendly. He used to carry my backpack sometimes." Silence stretched on. Jake looked around the classroom, confused by his classmates' reactions. Had he said something wrong? A dog?" Zithara managed to say, her voice cracking like breaking glass. "A German shepherd," Jake clarified helpfully. "They're great family pets, very loyal and protective. Max lived with us for 12 years before he got too old and we had to put him down." Professor Velthon made a sound like creaking wood. You lived with an apex predator in your home for 12 years? "Well, yeah," Jake said, still confused. "Lots of families have dogs. Some people prefer cats, but I've always been more of a dog person." The professor's tentacles began shaking violently. "Cats? There are more types of these creatures?" "Oh, sure," Jake said. "Dogs, cats, birds, fish, reptiles. People keep all kinds of pets. My neighbor had a python that was almost 20 feet long. Really beautiful snake." At the word python, Veltar fainted, sliding out of his chair onto the floor with a wet thud. Jake immediately stood up, concerned. "Is he okay? Should I call for help?" But the rest of the class was backing away from Jake now, pressing themselves against the walls as far from him as possible. Even Professor Velthon was slowly retreating toward the door. Class is dismissed," the professor managed to say. "Early dismissal today. Everyone, please leave quietly." The students rushed for the exits, carrying the unconscious Veltar between them. Within moments, Jake was alone in the classroom with Professor Velthon, who was staring at him with what Jake could only describe as horrified fascination. "Professor, did I say something wrong?" Jake asked. "I didn't mean to upset anyone." Professor Velthon's bark patterns flickered rapidly. "No, Cadet Morrison. You said nothing wrong at all." But as Jake left the classroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He just wasn't sure what. Commander Thesic sat in his private office long after the Academy's normal hours had ended. The lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the quiet hum of his computer terminal. On his desk lay a single datapad containing information that had fundamentally changed his understanding of the galaxy. 3 days had passed since Professor Velthon had contacted him about the incident in xenobiology class. The professor had been so disturbed by Jake Morrison's casual comments that he had requested an immediate security review of all Earth-related files. What Commander Thesic had discovered in those classified files made him question everything. He thought he knew about humans. The files were marked with the highest security classifications, restricted to only the most senior coalition military officials. The warning labels alone were enough to make most beings nervous. Extreme caution required, psychological impact warning, and not suitable for standard personnel review. Commander Thesic had read through them 3 times, and each reading had made the situation seem more impossible. According to the files, Earth was not just another inhabited world. It was classified as a Class 12 deathworld, a category so dangerous that only 2 other planets in the known galaxy shared the same rating. Most coalition worlds were rated Class 1 or 2, with Class 3 worlds considered hazardous for most species. The report began with a simple statement that had chilled Commander Thesic to his core. Earth's biosphere is dominated by predatory species, in quantities and varieties unprecedented in galactic records. The dog that Jake had mentioned so casually was described in the files as a domesticated pack hunter, descended from apex predators capable of bringing down prey many times their size. The report noted that humans had somehow convinced these creatures to live in their homes and protect their children. But that was just the beginning. Earth's oceans contained creatures called great white sharks, predators so perfectly evolved for killing that they had remained essentially unchanged for millions of years. These sharks could leap completely out of the water to catch prey, and their bite force could crush the bones of creatures weighing several tons. Humans, according to the files, voluntarily entered the water with these creatures. Some humans even sought them out deliberately, diving into shark-infested waters for what they called recreation. The land predators were equally terrifying. Grizzly bears that could run faster than most coalition ground vehicles while weighing over 800 pounds. Polar bears that could crush a seal's skull with a single bite. Mountain lions that could leap 40 feet horizontally and climb vertical cliff faces. And humans lived alongside all of them. The files contained video footage that Commander Thesic had forced himself to watch despite his growing horror. Humans camping in areas where massive bears roamed freely. Humans hiking through territories controlled by pack-hunting wolves. Humans swimming in rivers where crocodiles waited in ambush. Most shocking of all, humans didn't just survive in these conditions. They thrived. They had built their entire civilization in the midst of creatures that would be considered weapons of mass destruction on most coalition worlds. Commander Thesic paused his reading to pour himself a glass of fermented kelp wine. His hands were shaking slightly, and the strong drink helped steady his nerves. The behavioral analysis section of the files was perhaps the most disturbing. Human psychology, it seemed, had been shaped by millions of years of constant predator pressure. Their brains were wired to instantly assess threats, identify escape routes, and coordinate group responses to danger. What coalition species saw as paranoid hypervigilance, humans considered normal awareness. What other species considered suicidal bravery, humans called weekend activities. The report included a detailed analysis of something called the human startle response. When surprised or threatened, humans experienced an immediate flood of chemical stimulants that increased their strength, speed, and reaction time. Their vision sharpened, their hearing improved, and their capacity for violence multiplied exponentially. Most coalition species had evolved similar responses, but the human version was far more extreme. Where other species might freeze or flee, humans were likely to fight, and they were terrifyingly good at it. Commander Thesic thought about Jake's performance in tactical exercises. The human's ability to spot patterns, predict enemy movements, and adapt quickly to changing situations suddenly made perfect sense. These weren't unusual talents for a human. They were basic survival skills learned from childhood. The files contained a section on human child-rearing practices that made Commander Thesic's scales crawl with unease. Human children were regularly exposed to controlled dangers as part of their normal development. They were taught to identify poisonous plants, dangerous animals, and environmental hazards from an early age. Human parents deliberately placed their offspring in challenging situations to test their problem-solving abilities and stress responses. They called it character building. Most alien species protected their young in secure environments until they reached full maturity. Humans threw their children into competitive physical combat and called it sports. The psychological evaluation section included interviews with the human diplomats who had first made contact with the coalition. The interviewing psychiatrists had noted unusual patterns in human responses to standard psychological tests. When shown images of various galactic predators, humans consistently rated them as interesting or beautiful rather than dangerous or terrifying. When asked about their ideal living environment, humans described locations that would be considered uninhabitable death traps by most species. One human diplomat had expressed disappointment that coalition worlds were too safe and boring. Another had asked if there were any planets with more challenging wildlife. Commander Thesic set down his wine glass and activated his communication terminal. He needed to speak with Admiral Kethvar immediately, regardless of the late hour. TED. Admiral appeared on the screen within minutes, his feathered head crest rising in alarm when he saw the commander's expression. Commander Thesic, you look disturbed. What has happened? Admiral, I've been reviewing the classified Earth files. We need to discuss the human exchange program. The human student? Cadet Morrison? He has been performing well according to the reports I've seen. That's the problem, Admiral. He's been performing too well. And now I understand why. Commander Thesic transmitted the relevant sections of the files to the Admiral's terminal. He watched the older being's expression change from curiosity to concern to outright alarm as he read. This cannot be accurate, Admiral Kethvar said finally. No species could evolve under such conditions. The files have been verified by our best xenobiologists, Admiral. Every detail has been confirmed through multiple sources. But Cadet Morrison seems so normal. That's what makes it terrifying, Admiral. To him, this is normal. He grew up thinking that living with apex predators was a standard part of childhood development. Admiral Kethvar was quiet for a long moment, his crest feathers fluttering as he processed the information. Commander, what do you recommend we do about this situation? I think we need to test him, Admiral. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. What kind of test? Commander Thesic pulled up another file on his terminal. There's a training exercise scheduled for next week. A survival mission on the outer moon of Kepler-7. It's supposed to be a routine exercise. Yes, I'm familiar with it. What if it wasn't routine? What if we introduced a real threat? Something dangerous enough to test Cadet Morrison's true capabilities? Admiral Kethvar's feathers went completely flat against his head. You're suggesting we put the students in actual danger? We'll have extraction teams standing by, of course, but I think we need to see how a human responds to real predator threat. For the safety of the coalition, we need to understand what Earth has sent us. The Admiral considered this for several minutes before responding. Very well, Commander, but I want every precaution taken. If this goes wrong, we could start a war with Earth. Commander Thesic nodded grimly. Admiral, after reading these files, I'm not sure we could win a war with Earth even if we wanted to. The transport shuttle carried 12 students toward the barren surface of Kepler-7's outer moon. Jake looked out the small window at the rocky landscape below, noting the deep canyons and sparse vegetation. It reminded him of parts of Arizona where his family used to camp. This looks like a pretty standard survival exercise, he said to his teammates. The group included his usual classmates, Zithara, Veltar, Krix, and 2 newer students from different worlds. Veltar was nervous as always. His blue-green skin had taken on a pale shade, and his forearms were wrapped around his torso for comfort. I do not like the look of those caves, he admitted. They seem very deep and dark. Zithara's crystal body was reflecting the shuttle's interior lights in rapid patterns, a sign that she was processing multiple thoughts at once. The mission briefing was unusually brief, she observed. Usually they give us much more detailed information about the terrain and objectives. Jake had noticed that too, but he wasn't particularly worried. Military instructors often kept mission details limited to test their students' adaptability. It was a standard training technique. The shuttle touched down in a clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings. Sergeant Vorgek, their massive 6-armed instructor, addressed the students as they gathered their equipment. Your mission is simple, he rumbled in his deep voice. Survive for 24 hours and reach the extraction point on the far side of the canyon system. Work together, watch out for your teammates, and remember your training. Jake shouldered his pack and checked his equipment. Standard survival gear, water purification tablets, basic food rations, emergency shelter, and a communication device for absolute emergencies. No weapons, which was normal for Academy survival exercises. As the shuttle lifted off, leaving the students alone on the moon's surface, Jake took charge of organizing the group. It had become natural for him to assume leadership roles, though he wasn't entirely sure why his alien classmates seemed so willing to follow his suggestions. We should establish a base camp before we start moving, he said. Find some shelter, check our supplies, and scout the area. The group found a suitable cave system within the first hour. Jake examined the entrance carefully, looking for signs of animal activity. The scratches on the rock walls were concerning, but they looked old. Whatever had made them was probably long gone. As they set up their temporary camp, Jake noticed that his teammates were more nervous than usual. Even Krix, normally confident and aggressive, kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting trouble. Is everything okay? Jake asked. You all seem jumpy. It's probably nothing, Zithara said, but her crystal body continued its rapid light patterns. We're just being cautious. They made good progress through the canyon system over the first few hours. Jake led the way, choosing paths that offered good visibility and multiple escape routes. It was a habit he had developed during hiking trips with his family in the Colorado mountains. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh way. Red rock formations stretched toward the pale sky, and occasional patches of vegetation clung to the cliff faces. It reminded Jake of several national parks he had visited as a child. As afternoon faded toward evening, Jake began to notice signs that they were not alone on the moon. Scratches on rocks were fresher than they had appeared at first glance. There were disturbed patches of ground that looked like something large had passed through recently. Most troubling were the bones. Jake found the first skeleton wedged in a crack between two boulders. The bones were white and clean, picked completely, bare. Whatever creature they had belonged to was roughly human-sized, though the bone structure was clearly alien. He didn't mention the discovery to his teammates. There was no point in making them more nervous than they already were. But Jake began paying much closer attention to their surroundings. The attack came just as the sun was setting. Jake was scouting ahead when he heard Veltar scream behind him. He spun around to see something massive and dark emerging from a cave entrance they had passed just moments before. The creature was unlike anything Jake had seen in Professor Velthon's xenobiology classes. It stood nearly 10 feet tall on powerful hind legs, with long arms that ended in claws capable of tearing through metal. Its skin seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow, making it difficult to focus on. But what really caught Jake's attention were the eyes. They glowed with a cold intelligence that made it clear this was not just a mindless predator. This creature was smart, patient, and absolutely deadly. His teammates scattered in panic. Zythara's crystal body went completely transparent as she tried to hide behind a boulder. Veltar was running in circles, his forearms flailing wildly. Crix had frozen in place, his warrior instincts completely overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of such a massive threat. Jake's reaction was different. The moment he saw the creature, his mind went into what his high school football coach had called game mode. Time seemed to slow down, and his awareness expanded to take in every detail of the situation. The creature was blocking their path back to the base camp, but there were 3 other routes out of the canyon. 2 led deeper into the cave system, where they would be trapped. 1 led up a steep slope toward higher ground. The creature's body language indicated that it was preparing to attack, probably within the next few seconds. Its weight was shifted forward on its powerful legs, and its claws were extended. This was a predator that relied on speed and overwhelming force. "Everyone up the slope!" Jake shouted. "Move now!" His teammates stared at him in confusion. In their panic, they couldn't process his words. The creature charged. Jake threw himself sideways, rolling behind a cluster of rocks as massive claws swept through the space where he had been standing. The creature's momentum carried it past him, and Jake used the opportunity to grab a fist-sized stone from the ground. "Up the slope!" he yelled again, hurling the rock at the creature's head with all his strength. The rock struck the creature between the eyes with a sharp crack. It wasn't enough to cause real damage, but it got the predator's attention. The creature spun toward Jake with a roar of anger. Jake was already moving, sprinting toward the steep slope he had identified as their best escape route. Behind him, he could hear his teammates finally responding to his commands. Their various forms of locomotion created a chaotic symphony of sound. Zythara's crystal feet ringing against stone, Veltar's wet-slapping footsteps, Crix's chitinous legs clicking rapidly. The creature pursued them up the slope, its powerful legs easily matching their pace despite the difficult terrain. Jake could hear it gaining ground, and he knew they wouldn't all make it to the top before it caught them. He stopped running and turned to face the creature. "Keep going," he called to his teammates. "Don't stop." The creature slowed when it realized Jake had stopped running, its glowing eyes fixed on him with predatory focus. Jake could see intelligence there, and calculation. The creature was trying to decide whether to finish him quickly or play with its prey. Jake had faced this kind of situation before, though never with stakes quite this high. Growing up in Colorado, he had encountered black bears, mountain lions, and even one memorable confrontation with a pack of coyotes. The principles were the same regardless of the species. Make yourself look bigger. Don't show fear. Never run unless you have a clear advantage. Jake spread his arms wide and stepped forward, directly toward the creature. The aggressive movement surprised the predator, which had expected him to flee or cower. "Come on then," Jake said quietly. "Let's see what you've got." The creature hesitated, confused by Jake's behavior. In its experience, prey animals always tried to escape. They didn't advance toward danger while making themselves appear larger. That moment of hesitation was all Jake needed. He had spotted a loose boulder above the creature's position, held in place by smaller rocks that had been weakened by erosion. Jake picked up another stone and threw it with perfect accuracy at the supporting rocks. The boulder shifted, teetered for a moment, then came crashing down the slope. The creature tried to dodge, but it was too close and the boulder was too large. Several tons of rock struck it squarely, driving it to the ground with a bone-crushing impact. Jake didn't wait to see if the creature would recover. He turned and ran up the slope to rejoin his teammates, who were staring at him with expressions of shock and awe. Is it dead?" Veltar whispered. Jake looked back at the pile of rock where the creature lay motionless. "Probably, but we should keep moving anyway. Where there's one predator, there might be others." As they continued toward the extraction point, Jake was unaware that every moment of the encounter had been recorded by hidden cameras operated by Commander Thesik's observation team. The commander watched the footage with growing amazement and horror. Jake Morrison hadn't just survived an encounter with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. He had defeated it using nothing but rocks and tactical thinking. Most disturbing of all, Jake didn't seem particularly proud of his achievement. To him, it had apparently been just another day at the office. The emergency meeting of the Academy Council took place in the highest security chamber of Kepler Defense Academy. Admiral Kethvar sat at the head of the polished metal table, his feather crest completely flat against his head in a sign of extreme stress. Around him sat the Academy's most senior faculty members, all reviewing the footage from the Kepler 7 mission. Commander Thesik operated the holographic display, replaying the crucial moments of Jake Morrison's encounter with the Nexus beast for the 5th time. Each viewing made the assembled aliens more disturbed. "I want to be absolutely clear about what we witnessed," Admiral Kethvar said, his voice carefully controlled. "Cadet Morrison faced a Nexus beast, a creature that has killed entire survey teams of trained military personnel, and defeated it using primitive tools and tactics." Professor Velthon's bark patterns were shifting rapidly through colors that indicated confusion and fear. "The behavioral analysis is what concerns me most, Admiral. Notice how Cadet Morrison's body language changes the moment he identifies the threat. His posture, his movement patterns, even his breathing, everything becomes focused and efficient. Like a predator," added Dr. Yithel, the Academy's chief psychologist. Her multiple eyes blinked in sequence as she processed the implications. "He doesn't freeze like prey animals do. He doesn't flee. He evaluates the situation and takes aggressive action." Commander Thesik paused the hologram at the moment when Jake threw the rock at the Nexus beast's head. "Look at the accuracy of that throw. Perfect placement, optimal force. This isn't luck or desperation. This is trained behavior." "But he's never encountered a Nexus beast before," protested Professor Keklan. "How could he know its vulnerabilities?" "Because he's fought similar creatures," Dr. Yithel explained. "Perhaps not identical, but the hunting patterns are universal among apex predators." Cadet Morrison recognized the behavioral cues and responded appropriately. Admiral Kethvar activated his personal datapad and pulled up a new file. "I've been in communication with Earth's diplomatic corps since yesterday. I requested additional information about human childhood development and education systems." The Admiral's expression grew more troubled as he continued. "What I learned has forced me to completely reconsider our understanding of human civilization." He shared the new information with the council members and the room fell silent as they absorbed the details. Human children, according to the report, were regularly exposed to predator encounters as part of their normal development. They attended camps in wilderness areas where dangerous animals roamed freely. They were taught to fight from an early age through organized combat sports. They were deliberately placed in stressful situations to build what humans called character. Most shocking of all, Jake Morrison's background was considered completely ordinary by human standards. He had grown up in what humans classified as a safe, suburban environment. "If Cadet Morrison represents a typical human," Admiral Kethvar said slowly, "then we have fundamentally misjudged Earth's military potential." The council members exchanged worried glances. The implications were staggering. "Admiral," Commander Thesik said carefully, "I think we need to discuss the classified threat assessment protocols. Based on this new information, Earth should be reclassified from Category 4 to Category 1. Category 1 was reserved for civilizations considered immediate threats to coalition security. There were only 3 other Category 1 worlds in the known galaxy, and they were all monitored constantly by coalition intelligence services. Furthermore, Dr. Yithel added, we need to consider the psychological impact of Cadet Morrison's presence on the other students. Word of the Nexus Beast incident has spread throughout the Academy. The students are beginning to view humans very differently. This was true. In the 3 days since the mission, Jake's classmates had been treating him with a mixture of awe and barely concealed fear. Veltar could barely look at him without shaking. Even Crix from a warrior culture seemed nervous around the human. Changes weren't limited to Jake's immediate classmates. Stories about the human who had killed a Nexus beast with rocks were spreading throughout the Academy. Human tactical theories were being studied with new intensity. Students were requesting transfers to classes taught by Jake's instructors, hoping to learn whatever secrets had made him so effective. There's another issue we need to discuss, Professor Velthon said quietly. Cadet Morrison has no idea what he's done. He thinks his performance was normal, perhaps even disappointing. This was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire situation. Jake had returned from the mission apologizing for not being better prepared. He had criticized his own reaction time and wondered if he should have chosen different tactics. To Jake, defeating a creature that terrorized entire star systems was just another training exercise where he felt he could have performed better. Admiral, Commander Thesic said, I recommend we implement Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7 was the Academy's highest security classification, reserved for students who represented potential threats to galactic stability. It involved constant monitoring, psychological evaluation, and careful management of the individual's development and relationships. Approved, Admiral Kethavar said grimly. But we must be extremely careful. If Earth realizes we're treating their student as a potential threat, it could damage our diplomatic relationships. Over the following weeks, subtle changes began appearing throughout Kepler Defense Academy. New courses were added to the curriculum: human military psychology, deathworld survival tactics, and unconventional warfare methods. These classes were taught by hastily recruited experts who had studied Earth's military history. The changes were presented as part of the Academy's ongoing efforts to incorporate diverse perspectives from new coalition members. Jake was pleased to see humans getting recognition in the curriculum, though he was puzzled by some of the course descriptions. His own daily routine was modified in ways he didn't notice. His meals were carefully monitored to ensure he maintained peak physical condition. His sleep patterns were tracked to optimize his training schedule. His communications with Earth were reviewed for security purposes, though nothing was ever censored or blocked. Most significantly, Jake's combat training was quietly intensified. He was paired with advanced students from warrior cultures, given access to sophisticated weapon systems, and enrolled in tactical planning courses normally reserved for senior cadets. Jake assumed these opportunities were recognition of his academic performance. He threw himself into the advanced training with enthusiasm, not realizing that his instructors were carefully documenting every technique, every tactical insight, and every demonstration of human military capabilities. The real revelation came when Jake received a message from home. His younger sister Amy had sent him a video from Earth showing her playing with their new puppy, a German shepherd named Rex. Jake watched the video with a warm smile, feeling homesick for the first time since arriving at the Academy. Amy was teaching Rex to fetch a stick, and the young dog was bounding around their backyard with typical puppy energy. "Miss you, big brother," Amy said to the camera. "Rex is getting so big. Mom says he'll be big enough for camping trips by the time you come home. I can't wait to take him hiking in Yellowstone. We haven't seen a grizzly bear in months." Jake laughed at his sister's enthusiasm, not noticing that Commander Thesic was watching the video from his office through the Academy's monitoring system. The commander's scales had gone completely pale. A 15-year-old human child was planning recreational activities in an area inhabited by creatures that would be classified as weapons of mass destruction on most coalition worlds, and she was looking forward to encountering them. Commander Thesic made a note in his classified report. Recommend immediate escalation to Coalition High Command. Earth's military potential may exceed all previous estimates. Suggest treating future human contact with extreme caution. Meanwhile, Jake finished watching the video and started composing a reply to his sister. He wanted to tell her about his classes, his new alien friends, and the interesting creatures he was learning about in xenobiology. He was particularly excited to tell Amy about the Nexus beast. She would probably think it was really cool that he had encountered such an interesting predator. Amy had always been fascinated by dangerous animals. Jake had no idea that his innocent family video had just changed humanity's status in the galactic community forever. Earth was no longer seen as a developing world seeking to join galactic civilization. Earth was now classified as a planet of apex predators masquerading as a peaceful species, and Jake Morrison, the friendly exchange student who missed his sister and their family dog, had become the most carefully watched individual. In Coalition space, the galaxy would never be the same.